Okay then, so first up today we are going to have John, who's going to tell us a little bit more about himself. Now, you might have spotted the Aussie twang when he introduced himself. John grew up on a family farm in Victoria in Australia and learnt the value of effort for reward, earning 5 cents an hour as a farm labourer. That sounds like slave labour more to me, John, than anything else. John also has a best-selling book, which I think has the best title I've come across of a book yet, which is about business blunders and bloody good ideas. It's a classic Australian title, and it's about why 50% of business survive despite their best efforts not to, and why the other half fail. So, John, unmute yourself. Let's get going.
Good morning.
Good morning. I hope that was a suitably good introduction to you. John, let's start by asking you, what are your 3 top tips that you could give to business people?
Okay, so and I'll speak around the world on this subject. I've just got back from 3 days in Las Vegas, addressing a business group over there. I know it's a hard lifestyle. Someone has to lead it. I get it. But my first top tip would be to capture and monetize and measure your spare capacity in your business. And by that, I mean, Vicky, if we take a hotel as an example and it's got 100 rooms and it sells every room for £100 a night and it has a 50% occupancy, that means it's got a £1.8 million turnover, a good business, and everything's fine. But what about the 50 rooms that did not get sold last night? And so many people get hung up with their turnover, their gross profit, their net profit, their costs, all the sort of things that the accountant will speak about, but they forget the biggest hidden asset that every business has, which is the spare capacity, the unsold, the unmonetized, the uncaptured, the worthless value of the business, where fixed cost does not rise, yet it evaporates if you don't use it tonight. And most of the people here are service businesses, from Pete with his exhibitions. So as an example might be an unsold stand or an unsold sponsor slot. Once the show's finished, you can never recapture that. Everybody focuses on the cash content, and that's what you should do. Happy days. But what about a second blade on the razor that's capturing any revenue opportunity that you're currently not enjoying? That'd be tip number 1. Tip number 2, I read a book many years ago by a guy called Richard Koch, Kosh, and it's called The Pareto Principle. That's Pareto, or the 80-20 rule. And it changed my life. I read this 30 years ago and I thought, how simple. It can't be true. I tested it many times, but in fact, it is always true. And that says that, if you own a restaurant and you've got a big lot of choice on your menu, 80% of your menu will be wasted because 80% of your revenue comes from the top 20% of menu choices. 80% of your problems come from the bottom 20% of customers that give you all your grief. It's a fantastic book, and I'd urge anybody to follow it and run that in your business. And the last thing is, there's another book called by Stephen R. Covey, Covey, and he writes about the 7 habits of highly successful people, but one of them in particular is starting with the end in mind. I started my original business 30 odd years ago, and I called it the Queensland Trade Exchange. Great idea, because I was in Queensland. As soon as I opened in other countries and other states of Australia, it became a very bad name. So if I'd have started with the end in mind of where I wanted to be, today I'm in 31 countries, it certainly wouldn't have been called the Queensland Trade Exchange. And for the branding people on the call, that meant that I had to completely rebrand. I had to waste a whole lot of opportunity that I'd created with my previous business, which was great until I evolved. So there'd be my 3 top tips.
Fantastic. It'd be great if you could put those titles into the chat at the end, John. So tell us a little bit more about spare capacity and how you measure it.
Yeah, so the example I used with the hotel, but it can be with time. If going to the hotel, if you think of that, because it's nice and easy, it's in boxes and people understand everyone stayed in a hotel. So if you think that a hotel selling its rooms, if it has 100 rooms for £100 a night, that's 3.6 million in possible revenue if they sold every room every night for the whole year. A 50% occupancy says that last year's revenue was 1.8 million, or half that. So The other half is the wasting opportunity. So it's easy for a hotel. If you were a solicitor, for instance, and you were working by yourself and you could sell 40 hours a week and you were selling every hour, well, solicitors sell them for about what, 28,000, I mean, £1,000 an hour, then you'd have a revenue of potential of 40,000. So if you multiply that by the amount of weeks that you're prepared to work in the year, that'll give you maximum revenue if you sold every hour and every day that you wanted to work. The difference between your turnover last year and that maximum figure is your spare capacity. If anybody wants a bespoke analysis on that, we've got a thing on our website, or you can catch up with us later. But you measure whatever it is that in your business, if you're fully sold, fully committed, and I know everybody, it's hard to get fully sold, but that is your potential. It's the gap between there and what if I looked on your revenue last year of what you did earn, that's the difference, and that's your spare capacity.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So my next question is coming back to the book. What are some bloody great ideas that you've come across over the years, John?
Okay, well, there's a couple, there's a lot in my book, but I'll give you a couple of examples. So, I'm always amazed by some of the great ideas that people come up. We've got a business community. There's about 480,000 of us in 31 countries that club together, scratch each other's back and run ideas past one another. And there are some brilliant people in the world. I had a lady come to me. She used to work for a charity. And she said, John, I want to set up a cat cafe. And I said, oh, what's a cat cafe? She said, well, that's where I'm going to have a whole lot of cats in various rooms, and I'm going to serve tea and coffee, and people can come in and stroke the cat and see these things going past while they have coffee. And I thought it was the second craziest idea I've ever heard of in all my life, because I always keep the most crazy for something that I haven't heard of yet. So anyway, we got together and said, how are we going to do this? She said, well, I'm struggling for funds as well. So we worked away on an adjunct to crowdfunding, where we supplied services to the cat cafe. It was the sign maker and the carpenter putting all the little cat boxes around, and the flooring people and whatnot, kitting out this place. And we issued part of the payment to these people with cat cafe vouchers to redeem once the cafe was open. So if you did, and this was on a blend of sterling, because everybody needs to get paid some sterling money, we get it, but if you're opening a cat cafe, you're paying out all your money up front, waiting for the day to open to get any money coming in. And so for every £20 of work that someone did that was part of the funding, we gave them a £40 voucher to come and redeem once the cafe was open. And so they came and did £20 of work, but got £40 of future voucher. The £40 of future voucher to serve coffee and tea only cost maybe £5 to supply £40 worth of tea and coffee, because the ingredient cost is only a fraction of what the value is. So she got a carpenter coming in. The carpenter, instead of getting £20, got £40 voucher. They could do whatever they like with that, if they like cats, or give it to a friend or whatever it happened to be. So that was a way of funding a business where the big cost is paid up front before you open your door for a penny of revenue. Again, it's a simple idea, but it could apply to just about any business. Another one, I had a hotel on the Gold Coast in Queensland, and we had the Asian meltdown crisis in 1996. He was relying on inbound tourists coming into his hotel. And he was paying something like, or getting revenue of about $60 a night for his hotel, and the business disappeared overnight. So we said, well, what are we going to do? So we went down into the bar and found out that if we created a £20 voucher to the bar, it only cost about £4 for the actual ingredients. So to serve a £5 drink only cost about £1, and Bob would back me up with this. So instead of people paying for a hotel room, we said, look, come and book a room, 4 people staying in a room because they had a suite type room. And if you buy a voucher per night, per person, which is between the 4 people, £80 a voucher, we'll give you 4 or 5 drinks each over the bar. All you have to do is go and redeem the voucher. So they paid $20 each for the voucher, which is $80 in revenue for the room, less the cost of serving the alcohol, brought the room value back to about $68 a night that he was making. And he went and did better than that. He went to the local paper and said, look, I'm desperate. He was also the mayor, the president of the Chamber of Commerce. And he said, look, I'll pay people £1 a night to come and stay. You just have to buy a £20 voucher, but I'll pay you back a credit of it. So he put this into the paper. It got into the news. It got up, the Marriott came out and said, Tom Tate is bastardising the Gold Coast industry. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's, horrible example. He got publicity everywhere, but he turned his hotel around. So there's a couple of bloody great ideas, and I speak about them in the book in more detail for those that didn't catch up with the math then.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've had the bloody great ideas. What about the blunders? You must have some good ones of those.
Oh, where do I start? I was working with a hotel chain, and the blunders, by the way, are all the ones where you sit in a pub and you've just come in from an airline and you're sitting there with your mate having a wine or a beer and you're saying, I came out of that plane and why did the door open left to right rather than right to left? If it opened the other way, the people would have got out twice as fast. Those conversations when you've come across something in a business that seemed blindingly obvious to you. Why don't they do something a little bit different? Have we all sort of experienced those sort of scenarios? And you think, that was so simple. Why can't the business work that out? AFC Bournemouth was a quick example. I walked in there to do business with them the first day. I met Rob Mitchell, the commercial director. They were in League Two, just about to get thrown out of the Football League, if anybody remembers, about 15 years ago. And walked out and I saw a big space opposite the dugout, and it was 90 metres long and about 3 metres high with nothing on it. So here we are in a football ground with nothing on it, no signage. And I said to Rob, why don't you sell that sign? He said, it's not TV facing. I said, how many games do you have here? And he said, 30. I said, how many are TV facing? He said, 2. I said, so hang on, where do all the people sit when it's not a TV game? And he says, here, behind the dugout, looking at this big space. So I said, why don't you sell that space? We did. And that's now worth about £80,000 a year to AFC Bournemouth in the Premier League. So there's an example of a blunder that was staring people right in the face. So where's the opportunity in your business that you can monetize a valueless thing that's sitting in your business? The second one, and the last one I want to talk about, if I can today, surrounds a restaurant that I was working with. So the restaurant had little pretty flower boxes. There's about 6 of them. They're an Indian restaurant. Like a lot of restaurants, they firstly don't measure or catch any data of the people as they come in. When was the last time you went to a restaurant and they didn't capture your name, your email and all that sort of stuff? Many times, right? The second thing is that they didn't ask the buying motivation question. What motivated the person to come into the restaurant today? Rather than the dumb question that they ask is, how do you like the food? Which is a dumb question. So it doesn't tell you anything. You can't do anything with it other than get someone to nod. And here in the UK, people just nod saying, yes, it's all right, even if it's not. And then they go and not come back again because they hated the food, and then tell everybody else on TripAdvisor, but they don't tell the person that asked them the question. And they'd never given any invitation to return, but that's another story. So I started working with them and we went for 180 days and we implemented 2 strategies into the business. We did proper data capture and we asked the buying motivation. Excuse me, Vicky, can I ask you, what was the trigger that made you come into my restaurant today? I've never seen you before. Would you mind just sharing that with me? What was the number one thing that caused you to come into my restaurant? Yeah. You would think that some of the response was that it was great food. They'd heard about it from somebody else. It was, near where they were staying. They liked, the food. They liked the service. But no, 28% of the respondents, and this is over a 180-day period, 28% of the respondents, mostly women, said they loved the little pretty flower boxes. Now you think, wow. Had nothing to do with anything that you thought it would have something to do with. So the lovely flower boxes triggered the motivation. That looks lovely. Let me go in. Now, guess what that restaurateur, this was in 2000, 2016. Guess what that restaurateur was thinking of doing? He was ripping out the flower boxes and putting outside seating. So if he'd have done that and Brexit had happened, he'd be blaming Brexit, the weather, something else other than the reason why 28% fell off the entry list, and that was because he removed the flower boxes, which turned out to be nearly a third of the buying motivation. So the blunders like that, and we all see them every single day, but there was enough to write a book, and I've got probably 10 more books on it.
Brilliant. John, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us this morning. We've probably got time for a couple of questions. Does anybody have any questions for John? Bob, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just very simply, where can we buy your book, John? Because it sounds rather interesting.
So thank you for that, Bob. I've actually put a link in the chat
Thank you.
at the Nugget store. If you have a look there, it's 20 quid if you want the hardback copy, or if you can invest, I think it's 96 cents or some stupid number, you can get the ebook version or the Kindle version.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Anyone else? And then I'm going to introduce our expert speaker today. So we did a survey earlier this year about what people in this group wanted to hear about. And one of those was how to manage change. So I decided that Granger was the man for the job. Because particularly at this time, there's a lot of change that needs to be thought about around the cost of living, etc., etc. And with his lean hat on, I thought Granger was just the man. So Granger is the owner of BizSmart in Gloucestershire. He has a passion for helping people solve problems and has come from a background in engineering, a lean consultant, operations, quality, continuous improvement, director roles. So basically that's what he's doing. He's already told us about his free event coming up in Cirencester. So let's start by asking Granger the first question, which is, where do you recommend we start when we're thinking about managing change in our businesses, Granger?
Hi everybody. Well, I think that's a great question. So I was start at the very beginning, as Julie Andrews sang in The Sound of Music. You know, there are sureties in life which are death and taxes, but I also want to add change. Okay, so change is all about us. Change is always taking place. The seasons change, our lives change, our knowledge change, the people when we meet is change. So actually, we're all good at change and in being involved with change. But when it comes to businesses, you know, we seem to get stuck. We seem to get hung up in terms of doing things. And over the last few years, you said, Vicky, I've helped teams change, I've helped departments, I've helped whole sites change and complete businesses change and improve in terms of doing things. And I've also been a football coach and a swim coach for performance kids learning to eventually maybe become Olympic stars. So the first thing I want to talk about is you need to start with yourself. Okay, so it's really important to understand that you can't change anybody. You can only change yourself. And you can only create the environment around you that makes the change successful. And the key thing there is then the leadership, okay? It's your style, your leadership will either aid the change taking place in your business or you will hinder it, okay? So what we need to do is we need to sort of set the direction, we need to create the motivation, and we need to demonstrate it ourselves. And that's really important, because if you're asking people to do something and you can't do it yourself and you're not prepared to do it yourself, then actually that's when people will struggle with doing that. And the key to that is coaching.
Absolutely. I completely and wholeheartedly agree with that. So after leadership and getting that sorted, what's the next step?
So next, we need to think about the why of the change, okay? And the brilliant book, Simon Sinek, Start with the Why. So why do we want to change, then how, and then what we're going to do? And as much as involving your people in the how and the what becomes really important. And you need to be able to articulate the why to your team and get them to understand it, because you've probably been thinking about it for ages. You've been worrying about it. You've been planning it in your head, maybe on paper, and getting things ready in terms of doing that. But they haven't. You're suddenly going to announce it to them. You're suddenly going to do that. So you need to repeat it. You need to repeat it time and time again to get them to understand the why of the change. Every single day, every single session, every single meeting that you need to do, you need to have that real clarity of the why and helping people. And I always think about why. I go back to an article I read about Churchill, and during World War II, the budget was growing too much, and the Chancellor came to him and said, Churchill, we need to cut back on our spending elsewhere. Maybe we could drop the arts funding. And Churchill said, why do you think we're in this war? Yeah, the purpose of this war is we wish to maintain our way of life, and the arts is an integral part of who we are as a nation. We are not going to give up on the arts in terms of doing things. So I always think that's really important to understand the why, be really clear, and help people understand it. And that's really important to then get that motivation sorted.
And it's something that so many companies miss as well. They tell their people what's going to change, but not why, and then wonder why they get a backlash and it doesn't quite work out. So thinking about that, then we've all experienced people resisting change, even when we explain the why. What's your kind of advice in that area?
So yeah, absolutely. I think now what you're into is the nuts and bolts of change. Okay, that's the sort of the why is the sort of spiritual side of it. The things. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts. And I want to use what I introduce to all my clients about is the change curve or the bereavement curve. Okay, and this is a really important aspect, and the curve is literally, it starts off at denial. Then it gets into anger and sadness, and we drop off our performance or our change in terms of doing stuff. And then we get into the resistance at the bottom of the curve. And then we need to then get people out that resistance and move through exploration and into acceptance and commitments. We come out. And the reason I talk about that is actually that first beginning phase, that denial, that anger, the sadness or frustration, when people we call sort of drop off the cliff and they go, don't go, is ignore it. Okay. Our instinct is to fight back and justify everything that we're trying to do. Our instinct is to jump in and justify and help and get people to understand. But actually, don't. Just let them be angry. Just let them go through the denial. Just let them go through that first phase. Support them if they need to talk to you, but just let them get through it. Don't face off to it, because actually all you're going to do is make that resistance, the bottom part of the curve, even deeper if you do that. And that's really hard because most of us can't accept when someone is challenging us, or especially as business owners. We've created the idea, we've created this business, we're here in terms of doing stuff. So you've got to let that happen. It's totally natural. And actually it is natural. We all go through it, and we're probably going through it in some way at the moment in the death of the Queen. I went through it when I recognized it when I got made redundant years ago. I went through that denial, that anger, that phase. And actually by the time I got home in the car and I got home, I'd actually come through the bottom phase of it. I was starting the exploration, the acceptance in terms of understood it, because I recognized don't beat myself up over that first phase in terms of doing stuff. So it's really important to not resist and fight back against people in that first phase of the change curve. And then the other part of that is Bob sort of talked about the 80-20 rule, the Pareto rule. Absolutely, yeah. And we talk about normal distribution. There will always be a group of people who are going to be negative to the change. Yes, work with them, but don't put your energy there. Put your energy into the positive people. Put the energy into the positive parts of the change that's taking place. Put your energy there, and actually that will drive the process forward. So it's really important not to get focused on the negative side of the process change or the business change or whatever the change is that's going through your life. Always focus on the positive, and really helps to drive you forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Gems of advice there. It's all about people's emotional intelligence. That's my thing as well. So we see change implemented and everyone gets either excited or puts their heels in the ground about it. And then quite often what we see is that things drop off. So how do we go about sustaining that change, helping people build those habits so it actually keeps going?
Right. So what I would now introduce here is a structure which I call set the expectation, inspect the expectation, and reinforce the expectation. So set, inspect, and reinforce. And the idea here is, as the leader, we talked about the why, but you're actually got to reinforce the activities that's taking place. So we say this is what we're going to do, and then on a very regular basis, we have to go back to it and inspect and see that it's taking place in terms of what's happening. Are the tasks being done? Are the things being delivered? Now we've made that change. As the new systems in place, is the way of working in place, is the cash coming in terms of doing stuff, and then we're reinforcing that with our teams, reviewing the why, reviewing the change, reviewing what we're doing, reviewing what we're going, and it's those 3 steps that are really, really important. So set, inspect, and reinforce, and get that happening in terms of doing that. And great leaders lead from the front. Okay, if you're not willing to be involved, if you're not willing to be part of whatever's taking place, then actually why would your team buy into it in the same way? So as much energy that you put into it with your teams to motivate them, then they will pick up that energy and they will then start driving that forwards themselves as they start to do that. And the analogy I often give to business leaders I'm talking to that are trying to lead people, etc., is the sheepdog analogy. If you're going to herd the sheep into the pen ready for shearing, okay, the sheepdog doesn't bark at the side. They're not running into the pack. They're not driving the pack in terms of from inside. What they're doing is they're coaching it from the outside. So they're running left, they're running right. They're guiding the sheep along the path that you want to happen in terms of doing that, to get them to that point. So our role really is to be those guides through the process, to help our teams, to help the business really understand how we're going to achieve that.
Brilliant. I like that metaphor. That's good. Sheepdogs. So why is managing change so important, particularly in sort of micro and small businesses?
So yeah, as businesses grow, and maybe you outsource work to other people, so you're now engaging with other people, or maybe you're taking on a few staff in terms of doing things. So you're taking people into the business and helping that grow. But as our businesses grow and scale, the complexity of the way that we manage those outsourced activities, the way we manage those people increases. So the complexity of the communication, the complexity of the organization becomes harder. Therefore, what we have to do is we need to design our business to be successful at the next level of the number of people that we begin involved with. And that is a change process that we need to do. And that's involving people in the change in terms of doing stuff. And if we don't design for the change, if we don't design what's going to come, we get stuck in the valleys of death in between the changes that we're taking place. And often businesses have got stuck. We know that because they say, well, it's the marketplace that wasn't good enough, or maybe my team isn't good enough, or actually maybe I haven't got enough cash to do what I want, or maybe the business processes are failing in terms of doing that. But actually what's happening is you've failed to really understand the change process that you need to go through in order to get to the next success level that you're aiming for in terms of doing things. So it's understanding how you're going to bridge the gap so you don't get stuck in that valley of death, and how you manage that change successfully in terms of doing that. And that's why understanding change, even in very small businesses, and managing for change becomes really important.
Which actually brings us back to what John was talking about, which is the starting with the end in mind sort of thing, and not, actually thinking further ahead and what's it going to look like. I'm going to throw in one other question here. In this current day and age, with the whole cost of living crisis and everything, I know you've spoken about lean before and how people think that means, oh, I've got to get rid of personnel. Can you just give us a little bit of an overview of what you could change in your business within the lean type of model that would actually not involve personnel but really help businesses at the moment?
So the real power of lean, so people have always thought lean was about cost cutting, lean is about reducing the activity content of all your processes. Yes, that's how it used to be sold really in terms of doing, but people lost the sight of what lean came from. And if you read the book Lean Thinking, it's all built in there. And that's this one statement, which is grow your people. Okay. If you grow your people, if your people become excellent, if they really understand what you want to achieve, if you give them the skills, if you're constantly training and developing and coaching them in terms of doing stuff and inspiring them, then actually what you create is an absolutely awesome environment which actually can deal with any change. Yeah, and lean companies that really understand this concept of grow your people are the ones that are really successful, and they pivot instantly. You know, I've known very successful lean, what I would call amazing lean companies during COVID, who went from making metal widgets to making masks within months. You know, they put in clean rooms and started making masks for the UK government. There are 3 lean companies that are really successful in terms of doing things like that. They can completely pivot and change because it's all about people. People are your most, you know, we talk about it, but we don't normally do it because we're so wound up in the day-to-day activity of everything that we need to do. You've got to find that time, not just to stop and think about your business. You've also got to have that time to stop and grow and develop and coach and train your people. And when you grow your people, that's when you can really cope with anything that's taking place. And you can set those amazing challenges of, you know, how do we reduce our costs, guys? Because, you know, our energy bills have gone up by so much. How do we deal with this situation? How do we find more customers? Your teams, and I don't just mean your teams as in, you know, the people you recruit. You know, if you're doing the outsourcing, you know, you outsource teams around you, the people, you know, involve them in that process. If you're helping them grow and develop, then, you know, that you create a huge successful environment around you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Very insightful indeed. I'm sure everyone else agrees with me. Does anybody have any questions for Granger?
Not a question perhaps, but it's just a reinforcement in 2 things. One is we outsource very successfully down into Zambia and to South Africa. Great English speaking people, half the cost, and we get a better quality of person. So if anybody's looking to outsource, then that's one thing that I'd suggest. And I fully agree with retooling and agility. We had a Bulgarian sock manufacturer that made high quality heels and toes socks. They rejigged in COVID to making PPE, and they went from a 1.8 million to nearly 8 million turnover business purely by a little bit of fresh thinking.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Anyone else got a question? George?
Could I ask what percentage of one's time do you think people should spend on developing themselves and their people?
Great question. So I would, when we look at really successful lean companies and what I do for myself, it's an hour a day. So an hour a day spent with our people. And it's not just about training, it's about how we're improving our processes, how we're improving ourselves, etc. And that's the level of commitment that 2-second lean companies really give to their people and successful in terms of doing that. And I do that personally myself. I spend approximately an hour every day to focusing on how I'm making myself better and also how I'm learning. You know, I read lots and also focusing on all my business processes. So I practice what I preach and I encourage other companies to do exactly that.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Great question. Anyone else? Silence. I've got a question. How can we create a business that can cope with change rapidly?
So we'll start with grow your people in terms of that and motivation and inspiring them in terms of doing things. And part of that process, I've talked about coaching. So coaching is really important, and that's about not telling people. It's about asking them questions and allowing them to grow and to develop in terms of doing things. So that's the people side. But the business side is the realization that actually anything can be changed and updated. Yeah, we get hung up on, you know, well, I built that process, or that's the way we work, or that's our marketing approach, etc. in terms of doing things. And I think John was talking about, you know, you got to find those opportunities that exist in your business and realizing that actually anything is up for grabs in terms of change. And having that mentality of I can change anything And in the lean world, we always talk about your first improvement is your worst improvement. You can always change it. You can always do that. And that's the element you've got to build into your business and also into your mindset if you're going to be able to pivot, change, whatever they need to do to get through the different ups and downs of the business cycle that exists.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Can I just put something in the chat. I just wanted to think, because I love what Granger's saying here. And one of the big time saver things is my tip on this is recruit when you don't need to, because too many people recruit when they've got an opportunity and all of a sudden they're behind the 8 ball and it takes 10 times the time and you're in a fluster and you make bad decisions. So if you recruit when you don't need to, then you'll get to time to implement a lot of the stuff that Granger's talking about.
Yeah, no, I would thoroughly agree with that. One of my clients has just done exactly that. She said, I've got a person who wants a job and I don't need them, but let's take them on and we'll fill the diary. So, yeah.
I'm doing exactly that next week. I'm taking on my first employee in the business. You know, she's going to be my business partner as well in terms of doing stuff. But, you know, I don't need it, but actually I can see it coming down the road, starting with the end in mind. I can see in the next 6 months. So actually I'm doing it now. And so the business will be ready in terms of 6 months. And yeah, there's a recession potentially coming, you know, who knows in terms of doing that. Yeah, but it's, you know, you've got to be brave, you've got to make those decisions and you've got to be ready for that change.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Granger. Thank you very much, John, for both joining me today. And I'm going to hand back over again.